This Week in the Boardroom, brought to you by corporate board member and host NYSE Euronext, along with governance knowledge partners, the Center for Audit Quality, and Grant Thornton, and contributing partners, National Investor Relations Institute, and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.
Welcome to this edition of This Week in the Boardroom. I'm TK Kerstetter with Corporate Board Member, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to an interesting show today where we're going to talk about the board's role in innovation. And my guest for today is certainly an expert in this area. Let me introduce Marla Capozzi, who's the Senior Innovation Expert at McKinsey & Company. Welcome, Marla.
Thank you, TK. Pleasure to be here.
So the first thing that we want to get our arms around sort of is a lot of companies say that they want to be innovative companies, but what actually are the attributes of a company that has been successful in being innovative?
Right. Well, especially for large organizations, and even those that are moving up the ladder, if you will, very often there has been a belief that it's all about the culture. It's the more crazy stuff you have going on, the better. And we've actually found the exact opposite to be true. So the attributes that we see in those that are successful are first and foremost strategic focus. These are companies that have defined what innovation is to them. And it's not the academic definition of it. People get really hung up on, is it incremental, is it breakthrough, is it disruptive, and what do those words mean? Companies that have done this well have made it a business definition. They have said, we believe, for example, that customer experience is going to set us apart, and that's where we want to focus our innovation efforts. Or it's technology driven, or it's channel driven. So that's the first thing, is it's really a fundamental strategic choice. The second is the role of leadership. And not surprisingly, leadership is the greatest predictor of the innovation outcomes. It's a very emotional topic. Many people love it, many people hate it. And so the role of leadership in communicating the definition, managing, governing, making decisions, making their intentions clear, and protecting innovation from a resource standpoint also really matters. And the third thing, or the list could be very long, but I'll stop at 3 for now. The third thing is making innovation a discipline, which is, again, a little bit counterintuitive to the way we think about innovation. But if it's a repeatable, sustainable process that companies can do over and over versus just once, they are likely to have greater success. What we have seen in our research with companies that do this well, and doing this well means innovating at scale, year over year, 70% of the time, organically, not acquiring it via M&A or any other way, but from their core and within their institutions, are twice as likely to outperform their peers. So doing this and making it a discipline is really a worthwhile endeavor for companies to achieve performance targets.
How important is reward in this process, meaning whether somebody is successful or unsuccessful, having an environment? I understand the leadership part. So how important is sort of the reward part of it?
Well, it's interesting. We have had some conflicting research on that topic. So many of the reward and recognition that companies start with to motivate people to innovate, so they might do things like competitions or recognition or giving people different types of monetary or small rewards. Those are often correlated with unsuccessful innovation initiatives. And the reason is that the people who are motivated by those types of activities are often the wrong people. They don't necessarily have the right technical expertise. They're looking to change jobs because they're not happy. They're looking to work with a particular leader in the institution. And so those that are more successful, the motivations there are, I'm passionate about doing new things. I wanted to work on an important corporate initiative. And those are the types of motivations that we see more often correlated with success.
It's interesting. It does make sense, okay, when you think about it. But so this show is all about tying in board members. So what role does the board of directors play in establishing innovation within a company?
So I think the first one they can do is start asking questions around what role should innovation play in the strategy, how has top management started to think about its role in both performance targets, growth aspirations, its position in the marketplace, because it is a fundamental strategic question. It influences where are attackers coming in, what's the role of technology going to be, what are happening with consumers, consumer segments, and consumer attitudes and beliefs, and how are those changing. So I think one of the first things that's really important is asking these questions and having a way to go back and forth with top management on pushing on some of these fundamental important questions. I think the second one is to figure out how they can start to actively govern innovation. One of the other things that we have found is that when innovation is integrated into strategy, planning, resource allocation, and performance management, companies are 6 times more likely to achieve the financial targets that they set out to achieve. And so that integration with what the company does is really important. So the idea that innovation can be a sideshow or an incubator or something off to the side and we'll pay attention to it when we need to is less likely to be successful than when it's fundamentally core. And I think that governance is certainly a role that the board can play actively. And then lastly, I would say is metrics. There's a lot of ways to think about the traditional metrics, percentage of sales. 3M pioneered the percentage of sales based on products launched in the last 4 years. There are a lot of other ways to look at metrics, but that is a really fundamental area that the board can play in honing in on a couple of the core metrics, not 25, but 2 or 3 that they want to track and look at how well the organization is performing against those particular metrics.
Yeah. You know, we can't sort of talk about things in today's environment without talking about the risks, and particularly in the responsibility that a board has sort of to monitor risks. So when you're looking at a company that has made the commitment to be aggressive in innovation, what are the risks, or how does a board monitor the risks relative to a company that has that type of strategy?
Well, I think the good news is the set of risks are pretty much the same. And the even better news is that boards are good at managing risk and have gotten a lot better at managing risk. And so I think that what they can do is just apply the innovation lens to those risk elements. And it's going to be reputation risk, market risk, operational risk, execution risk, technology risk, the usual set of risk levers that they're going to be concerned about. The nuance to it is they have to do it with much more level of uncertainty than they do with existing, because the existing risk is much more predictable on the core business because they're familiar with it. This is going to be slightly unfamiliar, or depending on how far away from the core business, more unfamiliar to the board. So the same risk processes, the same categories, the same discipline applies. It just has to be more forward-looking, more dependent upon uncertainty, and the ability to adjust and readjust as necessary. So it has to be more dynamic. And there may be risks that are, certainly bigger than others, or ones that they're not willing to tolerate versus other risks. And those would need to be defined as it relates to the innovation.
Right. So not that different than typical risk evaluation.
Exactly.
So, Marla, what advice might you offer a board of directors that knows that they need to be innovative to fuel future growth? And that, we're seeing certainly that in a lot of industries where you can't just sit still. Right. It's the grow or die theory. So,
absolutely.
With that, what advice might you offer boards and companies that need to be in that mode?
Right. Well, interestingly, we have a very strong belief that the type of innovation that most of these types of organizations want to achieve is innovation at scale. Having little pockets of interesting activities going on is helpful for the culture, but it's not going to create sustained value. And in order to create that type of sustained value over time, this has to be a top management priority. It can't be a bottoms-up activity. You can have bottoms-up activities happening at the same time, but this has to be a fundamental strategic choice and a priority that the CEO gets behind. When it is a priority for the CEO, it will ultimately be a priority for the board. And it will become a priority in terms of the where to play choices, the governance, the metrics, and how it fits overall with the institution. And from there, I think that the questioning that the boards can provide from an external perspective, challenging orthodoxies, challenging the status quo, is one of the best push mechanisms to really get beyond and ensure that companies don't get stuck, right? So what we see are these core beliefs and these orthodoxies as some of the fundamental barriers to innovation. And these are the beliefs where I'll hear executives say, we can't do that. Consumers won't pay for that. We can't access that channel. Our distribution channel will be extremely upset and turn on us if we do X, Y, or Z. And those are the beliefs that really hurt, especially incumbent organizations. And as a result, they all end up having the same profit architecture. And so competitors look very, very similar. And this is where attackers usually make their moves. And so the board having that external perspective, asking lots of questions, understanding the aspirations, and are they operationally aligned with their aspirations, is going to be one of the best things that they can do. And in that capacity, I think the board can be an advantage. I mean, even ultimately a competitive advantage to innovation if it takes on that type of a governance role. Now, I think obviously the board has to be very careful between its role in pushing and asking and what senior management does, right? But that pushing and prodding and making time on the agenda, I think boards have the same challenge that senior leadership teams have, is making time on the agenda for innovation when there's so much to cover from an audit and from a regulation, from a core business, from a performance management standpoint, from all of those aspects of running the business. Just making time on the agenda is hard enough, and boards meet so infrequently that it's even harder.
Yeah. Well, this topic certainly fits with, we've coined this year as the year of corporate strategy, last year being shareholder communications, this year being corporate strategy. So this innovation discussion is a perfect fit for us in the beginning of the year. I want to thank you for joining us on this important topic. And that will conclude this edition of This Week in the Boardroom. We hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back again next week where we'll take another look at a critical topic that'll help you be a better board member or committee member. And we'll see you then.
Join us again next week for This Week in the Boardroom, brought to you by corporate board member and host NYSE Euronext, along with governance knowledge partners, the Center for Audit Quality and Grant Thornton, and contributing partners, National Investor Relations Institute and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.